Another of this month's releases is The Company of Wolves. Following its success in London, it is now showing in all of Britain's major cities. Anna Ambrose interviewed the film's writer, Angela Carter, and the director, Neil Jordan, soon after the film had opened.
For me, really, the kind of films that recently that have had, you know, that have been huge successes and that have got people back to the cinemas and have allowed directors actually to do splendid things with the medium are ones that have dealt with very simple and, you know, very simple, emblematic and permanent things, you know, almost fairy tales, really. And the problem I've found in watching, say, the kind of films that Lucas and Spielberg have been making, is that you know, while they've grasped this kind of fairy tale sense of wonder, they've thrown their adult intelligence out the window, you know. And the attraction for me for Company of Wolves was that on the one hand it was a fairy tale, but yet there was this incredibly devilish and incredibly wicked intelligence behind it. Behind the analysis of the fairy tale, which was Angela's, you know? And I saw it as a chance to make a film, really, whether or not it had the appeal or would have the success of those large films, I didn't imagine it would, but that would allow me to do something on something like that scale, but yet with the intelligence that that real fantasy should have, you know, for children and adults.
I should say that, I mean, I'm not a great dog lover myself, but when my grandmother used to tell me the story of Red Riding Hood when I was a very little girl, a very, very little girl. She used to tell it me with actions, and she had no truck with all the consoling versions of it where the woodcutter comes and opens the wolf up. She believed in ending it on the wolf eating Red Riding Hood, and when she came to the bit where it says, and then he leapt upon her and gobbled her all up, she used to leap upon me and pretend to gobble me all up. And I thought this was wonderful. I thought this was quite ecstatic. I used to squeak and shiver and say, "Oh, Granny, Granny, do it again." And very often, to please me, she would. And therefore, though I may have, you know, I personally may have an image of grandmothers as very aggressive people, I tend not to think of wolves in the same way. In the context of the movie, it's the grandmother who's telling the story to Rosaleen to turn her against the wolves, and we know what that means. We know what that means. She's warning her against men and against marriage, and the aggressiveness of the wolves in that sequence is Granny's strategy to keep the child for herself.
There's something I should tell you.
Yes?
But maybe you're too young.
Tell me, Gran.
Too young to understand.
Oh, go on, Gran, tell me.
But maybe no child is ever too young. A wolf may be more than he seems. He may come in many disguises.
What's that?
The wolf that ate your sister was hairy on the outside. But when she died, she went straight to heaven. The worst kind of wolves are hairy on the inside. And when they bite you, they drag you with them to hell.
What does wolfness mean for you in the story or in the film?
Well, it's libido, to a degree. It's it means various things during the course of the story. It's an ambiguous concept. It means the projections that human beings have made upon animals of usually their own lack of self-restraint. You know, the projections of beastliness that we've made on beasts, because animals, after all, cannot behave well or badly. They can only behave the way they are, and we project upon them our negative perceptions of ourselves. This is especially with the idea of the werewolf, the man who is not responsible for his humanity or for his wolfishness, you know. The person who is not responsible for its own humanity. Sometimes in the movie, the wolves represent a kind of otherness of nature as opposed to culture, the forest as opposed to the village. They're the margin of terror around the habitations of human beings, the margin of fear. But to themselves, of course, they're just wolves. I mean, they're more afraid of us than we are of them.
Personally, I found the wolves in the film threatening. Do you think one's response to the wolves is different depending on whether one is male or female?
Well, I think one's response will be different according to whatever kind of person one is. I read the story, The Company of Wolves, once. I read it to a class of students in Minneapolis in the Midwest. And normally when I read that story, I have people on the edge of their chairs. They're actually, though I say it myself, they're actually terrified. I have them in the palm of my hand. It's kind of terrifying feeling of power. And I noticed as I was reading it that they were enjoying it. I mean, they were chuckling and everything, but there was no sense of tension in the room at all. There was no sense of freezing terror. And at the end, they chuckled and said, yeah, that was very nice and everything. And I said, but weren't you frightened? They said, well, frightened of wolves. And I said, yes, frightened of wolves. But there are lots of wolves around here. And I mean, there were wolves everywhere you looked. I mean, it's timber wolf country to a degree. And what they liked to do in the evenings was to go out and sing with the wolves. This is one of the hobbies of people in this part of the Midwest, because, you know, wolves do howl in chorus. And evidently, you know, kids would pile into cars and take, you know, some six-packs and go out and sit on hills and join in the wolves' chorus.
The whole movement of the story is about a young girl's discovery of her own sexuality, you know. And the wolf is an object she's been taught to fear, particularly by her granny. And it's the wolf, in the end, is in Angela's story in particular, is something she learns not to fear and she actually transcends.
Leaving you, are they? You'll be all alone. I'll tell you a story of a wounded wolf.
You've got several stories about wolves within the film, and most of them are from Angela Carter's short story, but the one that isn't is about the she-wolf.
That was in... I myself felt that Rosaline, the heroine of the story, yeah, should tell a story to herself, yeah? You know, that she should tell something that she had made up herself and that actually refers to what she has learned from everything she's gone through. And we, even up to the point at which we started shooting, we weren't sure where this story should be.
A she-wolf came from the world below.
But why a she-wolf?
A she-wolf? Well, because she's about to turn into a wolf, isn't she? Do you know? And because Granny has been telling her for what seems centuries now, you know, about all these young men who rub ointment in their chests and roll about in the snow and are born out of bastard liaisons between priests and wenches and things like this, you know, and I think it's about time she had a little story about a wolf that she could identify with, you know.
And why was this wolf wounded?
This wolf was wounded because the wolf was in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know, the wolf was in the village at night. I mean, it's the appeal of a wounded wolf, yes, which turns into a wounded girl, aged about 13, really. And I suppose it is the menses, really, isn't it? You know, she's in this graveyard and she's bleeding, and this priest comes along and binds her wound and tells her, don't worry, it'll heal in time. And the interpretation that Rosaline herself gives to the story is really, and the wound did heal, for she was just a girl after all, who had strayed from the path in the forest, as Rosaline had been told not to do, you know, and had learned that there's nothing wrong with bleeding, you know, basically.
It's interesting that you're both writers and that you produce a script that's about telling stories. Do you think that's what attracted Neil in the first place?
I think perhaps rather than, you know, the emotional satisfaction of making a movie about storytelling, he would have been attracted by the idea of being able to use so many different modes of narration within the one narrative, so that as well as, you know, telling a great many stories, you could also do a compendium of ways of telling them. And I think he found, well, it seems to me obvious from looking at the movie that he found that very attractive indeed, that that in fact the way the film is being narrated is perpetually in flux. This is a sort of method of narrative that's used in a wonderful Polish film called the Saragossa Manuscript, which is a series of labyrinthine narratives that return again and again and again to the scene of a public execution.
A, Busqueros. Nie znam. Ale zaproś go kiedyś do mnie. Chciałbym poznać bliższe szczegóły.
Postanowiłem odszukać tego natręta, znanego w całym Madrycie.
Proszę cię, abyś nie przerywał w tym miejscu.
Pozwól pani, abym poświęcił kilka chwil temu człowiekowi.
Frasquita opowiedziała swą historię Busquerosowi. Ten Lopezowi Soares, który znów opowiedział ją seniorowi Avadoro. Oszaleć można.
Wszystkie te przygody zaczynają się po prostu i słuchacz sądzi, że wkrótce dopatrzy się końca, gdy tymczasem jedna historia rodzi drugą, a z tej wysnuwa się trzecia.
Coś na kształt reszt ilorazów, które można dzielić aż do nieskończoności.
Well, I tried to make the film without reference to other films, because it's one of the more specific things I try to do in the film, because I think the way that films are constantly being tied into different types of movies and referring to, say, Disney or referring to film noir, to 40s thrillers and things like that, I think it's a bit of a rot, you know, so I specifically decided to make this film just with reference really to the realist kind of fantasies and to the fairy tale itself. There's only conscious references really to one film, that's Night of the Hunter. Yeah, where the use of animals as actually observing human beings.
Once upon a time there was a pretty fly. He had a pretty wife, this pretty fly. But one day she flew away, She had two pretty children, but one night these two pretty children flew away into the sky, into the moon.
That's not a reference to the film itself, actually. It's just the use of the type of shot, do you know? And the use of the kind of perspective on human beings that gives you.
The house that it was alluded to. Very useful. Useful indeed. The box will certainly turn out to be a toadstool and make you deathly ill. Of course, you won't stay a young girl much longer. Your mommy and daddy will need all the help they can get. You must grow wise and learn all you can now that your sister has gone.
I myself wouldn't consider them as references because I don't like that kind of inter-referral business. I mean, one of the reasons I started to make films was because literature, and particularly Irish literature, is just clogged with kind of inter-references that just really, to me, stifle, you know, all the life of a piece of work.
In the end of your story, you've written, "See, sweet and sound, she sleeps in Granny's bed between the paws of the tender wolf." But in the film, Rosaline screams when the wolves erupt into her real world, instead of welcoming them, like I expected she would.
Well, you'll have to talk to Neil about that. The movie ends on this extended homage to Hammer horror films. It begins and ends with the screamer. You know, like the motif of Hammer was the screamer, wasn't it? Had to have very good lungs. Wagnerian lungs, really. The images preceding her screaming of the wolves erupting into the house are I think, are a wonderful image of repression being, you know, bursting apart. I guess that when the girl wakes up in a state of agitation, she's perhaps thinking that some things are justifiably repressed, but you'll have to ask the director.
I suppose the scream is a bit like, the end really is a bit like a kind of an orgasmic thing, you know, all these wolves running and running and running to meet her, and I mean, my feeling of her scream really is that it's both, you know, it's both joy and terror at the same time. You know the way you scream in the cinema when when you're on a roller coaster and something's coming towards you and you go, ah! It's that kind of scream really that I interpret it as.
I myself tend to think of it as a minstrel movie. It's about growing up. It's about female puberty, I suppose. If there's a moral to it, it's that there's nothing to be afraid of. Really.
Were you disappointed when it was given an 18 certificate?
Yeah, I was terribly disappointed. Because one thing is, I think this is most films nowadays are made for young boys. Most American films are made for young boys between the ages of 12 and 16, 17, yeah? Films like Streets of Fire and like the, films like The Warriors, films like, I suppose even all the Raiders movies. Gremlins, yeah. I mean, I can't imagine young girls taking much pleasure from those kind of movies, you know, and to me, this is a film that a girl of the same age could actually go to and should go to, do you know?
Company of Wolves
Company of Wolves is, yes, and it's a film that, you know, maybe a young girl that age should go to with her boyfriend, you know, and that would be enjoyed by both sexes, and that would be free of the relentless and kind of male attack that most popular films have in them.